Hey guys, tonight we drift over one of the most contested and complicated corners of the world, not with breaking news or political hot takes, but with sleepy footsteps and a long view. You're walking along a moonlit shoreline. The Mediterranean breathes beside you, soft and steady. There's no hum of drones, no sirens, no border fences, just sand, salt, and silence. It's so quiet that even time seems unsure if it should move forward. This is Gaza, though back in this moment, it doesn't even have that name. Just a coastal strip hugged between larger empires that haven't quite decided what to do with it. You probably won't survive this walk. Not because of anything violent or dramatic, just because it's going to take you thousands of years to finish it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I love seeing the sleepy corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step barefoot into the past, and the sand feels warm, like it's been holding the sun's memory for too long. There's no border patrol here. No one's checking passports or asking who owns what. The only lines are the trails left by goats, lazy and unconcerned. You hear water lapping quietly against the rocks. In the distance, some fishermen squint against the horizon. It could be 1500 BCE or earlier. This stretch of coast has always been important, not for what it contains, but for what moves through it. You're standing in what will become one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth. That sounds prestigious, but mostly it means people never stopped bumping into each other here, and occasionally fighting about it. The sea is a gift and a curse. It brings trade, culture, ideas, but also conquerors, taxes, and the occasional very confusing alphabet. Behind you lies a patchwork of small villages. Clay brick homes. Fields scratched out of stubborn earth. Wheat, barley, maybe some early figs. The people speak a language that doesn't yet have a name. Their gods are stormy. Their leaders are mostly just stronger farmers. They don't know they're in a future flashpoint. To them, it's just home. Historians still argue whether the earliest settlements here were truly urban, or more like scattered farming communities pretending to be cities. What's clearer is that around the 3rd millennium BCE, something starts to gel. You're passing through what might have been a Canaanite trading post. There are no signs yet, just worn paths. But trade routes are forming like neural networks connecting Egypt, the Levant, Mesopotamia. Gaza sits right in the bottleneck. A few days' walk to the south, the Egyptians are already building their strange triangular real estate ventures. Pharaohs with eyeliner and stonecutters with terrible backs. And they're watching this coastline, eyeing it not just as a buffer zone, but as a gateway. You can feel it in the architecture or lack of it. Gaza isn't trying to impress, it's trying to survive. Flat roofs, simple walls, buildings that say, "We've seen too much, and we'd rather not be noticed." Still, they are noticed. Egypt pushes north, not in one dramatic swoop, but in slow pulses. Military expeditions, trading caravans, the occasional badly translated marriage proposal. And you, ghosting along the coast. Feel each wave of contact settle like sediment foreign pottery shards. New gods added to the local pantheon. Slightly better farming techniques, slightly worse taxation. Somewhere, a scribe is engraving a record of wheat shipments that no one will read for 3,000 years. You pass him, yawning. By the 15th century BCE, Gaza shows up in the Amarna letters cuneiform tablets traded between the big political powers of the time. One letter complains that the local mayor isn't doing a good job keeping peace. Bureaucracy has officially arrived. Quirky fact: archaeologists once found evidence of ancient lice combs in this region that were so finely made. You'd think they were luxury goods. Turns out, even in the Bronze Age, nobody liked being itchy. The more things change. You wander northward, and the language changes subtly. So do the clothes. Cultures here are like overlapping soundtracks, sometimes harmonious, sometimes clashing. Egyptian influence, Canaanite persistence, the occasional mysterious merchant from Cyprus or farther still. You get the feeling that everyone is slightly suspicious of everyone else, but too busy surviving to make a fuss. And then, somewhere around 1200 BCE, something stirs offshore. Boats. Not Egyptian, not Canaanite. They come from the sea, not just physically, but mythologically. Sea peoples, historians call them, a catch-all term, like labeling everyone at a music festival as fans of sound. One group in particular decides they like this stretch of coast. They're called the Philistines. You hear their boots hit the shore, clangy armor, odd accents. Pigs on leashes, which unsettles the locals who've never seen bacon treated so casually. They're not just raiders, they settle. They build 5 key cities. Gaza is one of them. You walk through narrow alleys that didn't exist a decade ago. The Philistines bring new pottery styles, new weapons, and the kind of cuisine that gets them labeled as outsiders for generations. They love beer. They like pork. They don't write much down, which frustrates modern archaeologists to no end. Historians still argue whether the Philistines were a single culture or a mashup of displaced groups. Either way, they make an impression. You spot their temples, rectangular, sturdy, a little flashy. You get the sense they're trying hard to prove they belong. But belonging isn't easy in this region. Egyptian influence hasn't vanished, it lingers, like the scent of strong perfume on someone who left hours ago. Tensions rise. Treaties are made, then ignored. You walk through a town square where elders debate how much foreign is too foreign. The debate sounds oddly modern. Somewhere, a new player begins to rise inland. The Israelites, they're just a loose federation of tribes for now, occasionally showing up with complaints about Philistines stealing their cows or gods getting jealous. You catch whispers about a giant named Goliath, something about slingshots. The details are fuzzy, but it sounds dramatic. You sit by a well, listening to an old man mutter about invasions, bad harvests, and how kids don't respect the gods like they used to. You nod politely, though you suspect kids have never respected the gods quite as much as elders wanted. The world around you grows more interconnected, more fragile. Trade routes carry wealth, but also diseases. Political alliances shift like sand dunes. Empires rise and fall on rumor, rebellion, and food shortages. Through it all, Gaza remains. A small, stubborn, dusty city. A crossroads, a prize, a pawn. You look up at the stars, the same ones seen by Canaanites, Egyptians, and Philistines. And you realize something oddly soothing. Even in the chaos, there's rhythm. Repetition. The borders haven't hardened yet, but the patterns are forming. And you keep walking. You keep walking northward, though directions don't mean much right now. No one's passed around a compass yet. The sea is still to your left, shimmering like melted tin in the heat. Your feet follow faint cart paths and the occasional goat trail, while the land hums with quiet tension. It's somewhere around the 8th century BCE, and if you thought things were calm before, well, think again. The Philistines are still hanging on in Gaza. Their beer-fueled dinners and pork-rich diets continuing to irk their more conservative neighbors inland. They fortified their cities and even minted their own coinage in time. But now, bigger shadows are approaching from the northeast, shadows in the shape of marching boots, bronze helmets, and really long beards. Assyria is coming. Not like a slow tide, but more like a juggernaut pushing southward through the Levant, annexing everything that blinks. Their military campaigns aren't subtle. You hear them before you see them. Rhythmic war drums, heavy chariots, bureaucrats who bring entire filing systems on horseback. You crouch beside a thorny bush as they pass rows of disciplined soldiers, their king's face carved into every banner. Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, Sargon II. The names blur, but the message is clear. Resistance is, well, optional. They're not interested in Gaza for its beaches. It's the location. Always the location. A perfect little notch between Africa and Asia. Close enough to strike Egypt, stable enough to station troops. By the 7th century BCE, Assyria has swallowed Gaza. The Philistines remain in name, but their independence, long gone. You peek into tax records. Yes, those exist even now, and see lists of tribute. Silver, horses, wheat. Lots of wheat. But Assyria doesn't last forever. Empires rarely do. And soon, Babylon takes a turn. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Gaza gets absorbed again. The Babylonian rule is less flashy, more transactional. You sense weariness in the streets. People have learned not to decorate too boldly. When new rulers come every few decades, it's best to keep the wallpaper neutral. And yet life continues. Children run through alleyways. Merchants haggle over lentils. The coastline continues to buzz with commerce. Even as flags change, Gaza holds to its rhythm. It's not a military powerhouse. It's not a cultural trendsetter, but it connects things. That's its superpower and its curse. Quirky detail. Some ancient sources suggest that during Babylonian times, Gaza's ports still managed to host ships from as far as the Aegean. Imagine showing up for a palm date shipment and ending up sipping diluted wine with a sailor who can. Pronounce Gaza without spitting. Then come the Persians. Around 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great rolls in like someone who read all the bad Yelp reviews about Babylon and thought, I can do better. He allows deported peoples to return home, respects local customs, and introduces an oddly efficient postal system. Gaza, as always, watches, adjusts, and nods politely. Persian rule brings better infrastructure. Roads, relay stations. Tax assessors with surprisingly nice sandals. You stroll along the royal road and wonder how many love letters and official decrees got lost in the desert along the way. But historians still argue whether Persian control in Gaza was direct or administered, through local kings who pledged loyalty for convenience. Either way, you hear less grumbling than usual, probably because the alternative was being conquered by someone even less charming. Then suddenly clanged the sound of a different kind of invasion. Greek. Well, Macedonian, technically. You spot him first by the gleaming bronze armor, the wild eyes, and the distinct lack of any chill. Alexander the Great. He arrives around 330 to BCE. And Gaza doesn't welcome him easily. The city resists. Alexander doesn't like being told no. The siege lasts months. People inside are starving. The ones outside are sweating. And you're hiding behind a half-built wall, wondering why every historical figure insists on naming cities after themselves. When Alexander finally breaks through, he's furious. The result is brutal, one of those moments in history where no one gets a happy ending. Gaza is sacked, its leaders executed. The city survives, but only barely. Still, in the weirdly cyclical way of things, Hellenistic culture trickles in soon after. Greek becomes the language of administration. Gymnasiums appear. You watch a group of local teens awkwardly trying out wrestling techniques that seem to involve far more oil than anyone requested. You see Gaza reshaped once again, new statues, new art, new names for old gods. The Philistine identity fades. It's not destroyed outright, just gets diluted, merged, forgotten. Names like Philistia vanish from official records. People stop asking who you worship and start asking how much grain you've harvested this month. Then, once more, the curtain shifts. Enter Rome. By the 1st century BCE, Gaza becomes part of the ever-expanding Roman Empire. You immediately sense a change. The roads get straighter. The togas more elaborate. The taxation somehow even more creative. Gaza, now a Roman city, starts to benefit from imperial funding. Theaters, bathhouses, colonnaded streets. You stroll through the forum and hear debates in Latin, Greek, and Aramaic. Roman soldiers complain about the heat. Locals roll their eyes. This is a high point in Gaza's ancient urban life. Trade flows steadily. Olive oil, wine, incense from Arabia, even exotic goods from India make their way through Gaza's now thriving market. The city becomes a well-oiled node on the Silk Road's western edge, and yet you feel the pressure mounting. Religions are shifting. Somewhere nearby, new voices speak of a crucified man from Galilee. You pass early Christian gatherings, quiet, nervous. Within a few centuries, they'll outgrow the back rooms and basilicas will rise. You hear sermons, see crosses carved into sandstone. The Roman gods are losing followers, and a slow transformation begins. By the 4th century CE, under Byzantine rule, Christianity becomes not just a faith, but an empire-wide policy. Gaza adapts again. Temples become churches. Pagan statues are quietly recycled. The city, now deeply Christian, hosts monks, bishops, and theological disputes that would put your high school debate club to shame. Quirky detail. Gaza became famous in this period for its schools of rhetoric. You wanted to learn how to argue convincingly in Greek while wearing sandals. This was your place. Even Cicero would have blushed. You feel a strange calm. For the first time in a while, no one's actively invading. But it's a fragile peace. You can already smell what's coming. A hot wind from the south. Camels, scimitars, new prayers rising over the rooftops. Islam is coming. You exhale. The stars remain the same, but the names of God are about to multiply. You lean against a crumbling column. Byzantine probably, and stare out over the sea. It hasn't changed. Still calm. Still pretending nothing's happening. But the city behind you is bracing itself, because change is galloping in with saddlebags full of verses and a very different calendar. It's the 7th century now. The Byzantine Empire is creaking under the weight of its own bureaucracy, and something new is rising from the Arabian Peninsula. You don't hear war drums or the clang of armor this time. Instead, you hear prayer soft, rhythmic, carried on the wind. Islam has arrived. It doesn't take long. In 637 CE, Arab forces sweep into the region. It's part of the early Islamic conquests that are reshaping the entire Middle East. Gaza, like many cities in the Levant, doesn't put up much of a fight. After all, the Greeks, Romans, and Persians. The locals have developed a pretty seasoned response to empire. Keep your head down, change the official language, and maybe the new tax system won't be worse. And actually, the new system isn't terrible. At least, not right away. You walk through the city and see signs written in Arabic now, though Greek lingers in religious texts and marketplaces. A new rhythm settles over Gaza. The call to prayer becomes part of daily life. Churches become mosques, though some of the buildings keep their domes. Some keep their secrets. Islamic rule doesn't erase Gaza's past, it just folds it in. Traders still work the ports. Farmers still plow the same fields. A new mosque rises where a Roman forum once stood, and no one seems particularly alarmed. The city's identity continues to evolve, layering faith upon faith, culture upon culture, like so many tired paint jobs. But you do notice something different. This time, Gaza becomes more than just a waypoint. Under the Umayyad and later Abbasid caliphates, the city begins to thrive again. Scholars, poets, merchants with spices and stories from as far as India. Gaza's position on land and sea routes turns it into a mini hub, a node in a growing Islamic world. You pause near a market and watch a man sell incense while reciting lines of Arabic poetry. Badly. The people chuckle, not because he's good, but because he's trying. In some way, that's always been Gaza's story. Not perfection, but persistence. Historians still argue whether Gaza's importance during the early Islamic period was more cultural or commercial. Either way, something is blooming here. Slowly, quietly, but it won't last. Because just a few centuries later, Around the 11th century, someone shows who doesn't want poetry or dates. They want Jerusalem. You hear the clank of metal boots again. Not Romans this time, not Arabs. Crusaders. You don't need a calendar to know the 1090s have arrived. You can hear it in the chants, see it in the crosses sewn onto chainmail, smell the unfortunate decision to wear armor in 35-degree heat. The First Crusade changes everything. At first, Gaza is bypassed too small, too unimportant compared to the grand prize of Jerusalem, but that doesn't last. Eventually, the Crusaders realize that controlling coastal cities is kind of the point. You can't hold the Holy Land without controlling the lanes that feed it. So, here they come, European knights. French dialects, German accents, and a wildly inconsistent understanding of local geography. In EE Ling Ling CE, Gaza is taken. The Crusaders build fortifications, and for a brief moment, you're surrounded by castle walls, Latin chants, and imported wine that tastes like someone washed a grape in vinegar. They fortify the city, reinforce the port, and turn it into a Christian outpost, a checkpoint in a religious war with no end in sight. You crouch behind a Crusader banner and feel the tension rise. This isn't the multicultural trade hub you knew a century ago. It's more like a gated community with swords. Local Muslims are displaced or taxed. Churches are restored. Churches are restored. And the political situation is, in a word, awkward. In a word, awkward. But as always, empires rise. And overstay their welcome. And overstay their welcome. The Crusaders may have castles, but they don't have unity. And back in the Muslim world, a new name is rising. You hear whispers at first. A general, strategist, a charismatic leader who's about to change the map, Saladin. You feel the tempo shift. In 1170, he enters Gaza without much resistance. The Crusaders, sensing the tide turning, pull back. Saladin's forces restore Islamic rule and dismantle much of what the Crusaders built. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the city's older stones. Gaza, once again, adjusts. Mosques are re-established. Arabic reclaims the streets. Trade resumes, be it cautiously. The scars of the Crusader period don't vanish overnight. But if you think the seesawing is over, think again. Here come the Mamluks. You blink and it's the 13th century. The Mongols are tearing through Asia, cities are falling like dominoes, and the Islamic world is scrambling for stability. The Mamluks' former slaves turned elite warriors step into the chaos. They defeat the Mongols in Palestine and take control of Egypt and much of the Levant, including Gaza. And for once, you feel something strange. Order. The Mamluk era is one of rare stability for Gaza. Trade routes are maintained. Markets buzz. Religious scholars write dusty volumes you're definitely not reading before bed. The city becomes a quiet node in a disciplined, centralized system. Quirky fact: during the Mamluk period, Gaza was known for producing olive oil that was used not just for cooking, but for soap exported across the region. Imagine scrubbing your face in Damascus with oil pressed in Gaza. Globalization, medieval edition. You walk past a caravanserai roadside in for travelers and merchants. It smells like wool, spice, and exhaustion. Inside, people from 3 continents exchange stories, coins, and fleas. You smile. Gaza is back to being Gaza. But even this peaceful rhythm doesn't last. By the early 16th century, a new empire rises from the north, the Ottomans. And you know what that means? New banners, new tax ledgers, and a lot more coffee. In 1517, Gaza becomes part of the Ottoman Empire, and you are kind of relieved. The Ottomans, for all their red tape and powdered wigs, bring a kind of bureaucratic peace. Gaza becomes a district center, important, but not too important. And maybe that's what saves it. You settle into the 17th and 18th centuries like slipping under a heavy blanket. Life is slow, predictable, farmers farm. Traders trade. Local elites bicker about land rights. You could almost fall asleep here, but historians still argue whether this era was one of decline or quiet resilience. The population shrinks slightly. Some ancient aqueducts fall apart. But the city doesn't vanish. It holds on, and through it all, one thread remains. Location. Always that strip of land. Always that shimmer of sea. You sit quietly near a crumbling wall, listening to the breeze rustle through palm trees. Behind you, an imam chants the evening prayer. Children play nearby with a ball made of stitched cloth. It's peaceful. It's temporary. It always is. You rest your head against the cool stone of an Ottoman-era gate, watching the shadows stretch across narrow alleyways. It's the 19th century now. Time has taken a gentler turn in Gaza for nearly 300 years. The city has existed in a kind of suspended animation, overlooked outpost in a sprawling Ottoman empire. No crusaders, no sieges, just taxes, prayers, and the slow creak of wooden carts rolling over uneven stone. It's not glamorous, but it's peaceful. And in Gaza, that's rare enough to feel precious. You wake with the rising sun and wander through a market that hasn't changed much in a century or two. Spices, goat cheese, hand-woven fabrics dyed with natural colors. The Ottoman taxman stops by occasionally, writes something on a clipboard, and disappears into the next village. You pass a group of scholars debating something about land grants and inheritance made it, but polite. Everything here is slow and sleepy and slightly sunburnt. But off in the distance, you hear a quiet ticking. The modern world is coming. First, it arrives by telegraph wire, then steamships, then the awkward shuffle of European archaeologists and imperial agents dressed far too warmly and asking far too many questions. The Ottomans are still technically in charge, but their grip is weakening. Palestine is still a provincial backwater in the Ottoman map, but one with increasing strategic importance. Enter the British, or rather, the idea of the British. At first, they come as tourists, then surveyors, then missionaries and consuls. They take an interest in the Holy Land in Gaza, like always, gets caught up in the mess of other people's grand plans. Quirky fact. In the mid-1800s, a few Victorian-era visitors tried to describe Gaza in travel journals. One referred to it as a dusty disappointment, while another called it a curious city of flies and olives. You can almost hear Gaza rolling its eyes. You walk along a dirt road and spot something new: railway tracks. By the late 19th century, Ottoman authorities, with a little German encouragement, start building rail lines to connect Palestine with the rest of their shrinking empire. Gaza becomes a stop, not a hub, but a useful dot on the map. It means easier movement of goods, troops, and when the time comes, foreign soldiers with suspiciously polished boots. You sit by the station, watching locals and visitors try to figure out train schedules that never arrive on time. It feels modern. It feels inevitable. And then, just like that, everything accelerates. World War I, you feel the tremor before you see the uniforms. Gaza, always the sleepy crossroad, is suddenly smack in the middle of a global war. In 1917, it becomes the focal point of 3 separate battles between the British and the Ottomans. The first and second battles of Gaza are Ottoman victories, surprisingly gritty ones. But the third? That's when things change. General Allenby marches through, leading British troops into Gaza after a fierce campaign. You pass broken cannons and tired horses. The smell of gunpowder lingers in the air for weeks. British control is swift, and by 1918, the Ottomans are gone. You blink, and the signs start changing. English replaces Turkish on government buildings. The Union Jack flaps awkwardly in the dry breeze. A new administrative system begins to creep in, not Ottoman, not local, but British. The year is 1920. Palestine is under the British mandate. Historians still argue whether the British saw this territory as a burden or an opportunity. Either way, Gaza becomes a forgotten gear in their machine. They're focused more on Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. Gaza is rural, poor, and by colonial standards complicated, but not important enough to fix. Still, the population grows. Schools open, a few roads are paved. People argue about identity, land, and the future. It's the kind of low-level tension that doesn't make headlines, until it does. And then, just like clockwork, you hear the rumbling again. Zionist immigration increases through the 1920s and 30s, especially in the northern parts of Palestine. Jewish and Arab communities grow uneasily side by side. Gaza remains majority Arab, but the winds of change are blowing. You hear them in newspapers, sermons, coffee houses, buzzing with politics and worry. Then World War II erupts, and the world holds its breath again. Gaza doesn't see frontline combat, but British troops pass through. Military camps pop up, rationing takes hold. Somewhere nearby, radios crackle with news of the Holocaust whispers that turn to headlines. Grief too big for words. In 1947, the British announce they're done. They hand the problem of Palestine over to the United Nations. And the UN, bless them, comes up with a partition plan one that proposes splitting the land into two states. One Jewish, one Arab. You hear people gasp. You hear others scream. In Gaza, confusion turns quickly into anger. According to the plan, Gaza would become part of the proposed Arab state. But locals don't trust the plan. Most Arab leaders reject it. And before any agreement can settle, war breaks out. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War. You duck behind rubble as fighting explodes across the country. Thousands of Palestinian Arabs flee their homes, some under fire. Some expelled, many never to return. Over 700,000 people become refugees. You pass them in droves. Walking, hitching rides, carrying children, staring blankly at a future no one prepared for. Gaza's population more than doubles in weeks. Tent cities rise from the sand. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency sets up shop, distributing powdered milk, soap, and a lot of forms. The strip, yes, it's now called, that suddenly feels much smaller, crammed, tense. Every decision made in London or New York now echoes in the daily struggle for bread and water. And then, unexpectedly, Egypt steps in. Egyptian troops take control of Gaza in 1948 and remain there, but they don't annex it. Gaza becomes a strange political orphan, ruled by Egypt, but not part of Egypt. You wander through offices with Egyptian flags and Palestinian administrators, trying to make sense of rules no one fully explains. Quirky fact: for nearly 2 decades, Gazans carried Egyptian-issued travel documents that didn't grant them Egyptian citizenship. It's like being given a library card to a library that 1T lets you inside. You walk through the camps: Yonus, Rafe, Jableon, longer temporary, but permanent fixtures. Children are born and raised in tents made of stitched burlap and corrugated metal. A generation comes of age who've never known anything but displacement, and all around them, borders. The Strip is now hemmed in by Israel to the east and north, the Mediterranean to the west, Egypt to the south. It's less a piece of land and more a pressure cooker. And that pressure, it's rising. You pause near the wire fences that begin to sprout up. The kind that divide fields and families. The kind that redefine the simple act of walking in a straight line. The land hasn't moved, but everything has changed. The sand tastes different, no grittier, sharper. There's tension in the air you didn't feel before. It's the 1950s in Gaza, and the war is technically over. But peace, that hasn't even shown up to the meeting. You drift along the southern border, where Gaza meets Egypt in a political half-embrace. Egyptian rule is the law of the land, but it feels ... provisional. There are ministries and flags, yes, but no effort to absorb Gaza fully into the Egyptian state. It's being watched, not welcomed, managed, not mothered. Refugee camps swell further. Tents become huts, huts become shacks. You pass rows of cinder block buildings, unstamped, functional, and soul-draining. Everything smells like dust and cooking oil. The streets echo with the footsteps of people who don't belong anywhere. Children grow up learning 2 languages, Arabic and waiting. Yet somehow, the markets keep working. Teachers teach. Families gather around radios, crackling with pan-Arab promises. And in the midst of all this quiet survival, you hear a different sound. A restless, rhythmic thump. It's the sound of trucks, military ones. Egypt is fortifying the strip knot with welcome mats, but with watchtowers. And Israel, just across the wire, is doing the same. The border isn't a fence anymore, it's a line of friction. And then, in 1956, the fuse is lit. You hear it first in Cairo. Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt's charismatic mustachioed president, has nationalized the Suez Canal. The British and French lose their collective colonial minds. Israel, seeing opportunity, joins them in a secret plan to invade Sinai. You're in Gaza when the tanks roll in. Israeli forces invade from the east. The operation is fast, sharp, and ruthless. Gaza's streets erupt in gunfire and confusion. You duck behind rubble as civilians flee. Gunmen fire from alleys. And the city is once again caught between larger powers playing chess with tanks. Israeli troops take the strip quickly, but the occupation is short, barely a few months. Under immense pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union, Israel is forced to withdraw. Egyptian control returns, but everything feels different. You walk the streets of Khan Yunis and Rafah in the wake of the invasion. There's fear and bitterness, and funerals, many of them. The scars of the brief occupation run deep, especially among the young. In refugee camps, new stories begin to circulate. Not just of exile, now, but of revenge. Quirky fact: during this period, Gaza becomes something of a symbol in the Arab world, not for wealth or influence, but for defiance. It shows up in poems, speeches, and protest songs. The place no one wanted has now become the place that cannot be ignored, but the defiance has nowhere to go. Egyptian rule remains heavy. The border with Israel becomes harder, more monitored, more violent. You hear about Fedayeen Palestinian militants crossing into Israel to sabotage, steal, or resist. Retaliation is inevitable. Israeli forces strike back, often harder than the initial incursion. The cycle begins. Provoke, punish, repeat, and always refuge. By 1960, the Strip's population is nearing 500,000. Packed into a space about the size of Las Vegas, but without the casinos or air conditioning. The UN is still handing out rations. The education system, under Egyptian oversight, begins to churn out students fluent in grammar, frustration, and pan-Arab ideology. Historians still argue whether Egypt's rule in Gaza was meant to help Palestinians or simply manage them. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. Cairo made speeches about liberation but built fences, not futures. You walk through an Egyptian checkpoint near Rafah and see a familiar pattern. Gaza isn't its own master. Not even close. It's a pawn. Again, then comes 1967. You feel it before it begins. That tightness in the air. Radio stations grow tense. Soldiers start to pace. War is in the forecast, and this time, it's going to change everything. In early June, Israel launches a preemptive strike against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. What becomes known as the Six-Day War unfolds with dizzying speed. You barely have time to process before Gaza is under Israeli control again. This time, they don't leave. Israeli troops seize the entire Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. In less than a week, the entire map of the region is rewritten. The borders you've been walking along for centuries, gone, replaced with barbed wire, checkpoints, and military orders. You wander through Gaza City and see new faces in uniform. Hebrew signs next to Arabic ones. Israeli administrators assessing traffic flows and utility lines. Curfews are imposed. ID systems introduced. The old refugee camps, now 20 years old, become part of a broader occupation infrastructure. And it's not just military. Israel begins building settlements. You first notice them on the edge of the strip, neat little rows of white houses, guarded by fences and patrolled by soldiers. The settlers come with ideology, security arguments, and citrus trees. They claim ancient ties to the land. The Palestinians, many of whom still have the keys to homes they fled in 1948, look on in disbelief. The settlement project ramps up in the 1970s and 1980s. By the end of it, about 8,000 Israeli settlers are living in Gaza. In 21 fortified communities, heavily guarded and heavily resented. You walk the lines between them, literal lines, fences, watchtowers, one road for settlers, another for Palestinians. And in between, tension, waiting snipers sometimes. Quirky detail, the largest settlement, Gush Kataf, becomes famous for its greenhouses, advanced agriculture in the desert, exporting strawberries and cherry tomatoes even as bullets fly a few kilometers away. Gaza becomes an accidental microcosm, high-tech utopia and humanitarian crisis sharing the same cramped coastline. You pass a classroom in Rafe where a teacher is trying to explain geography to a child who's never left the strip. "Past this is Palestine," he says, pointing at a map. The child asks, "Can we go there?" The teacher doesn't answer. Meanwhile, resistance begins to simmer. Some Palestinians begin organizing underground, others build NGOs, and many just try to live. But the pressure of occupation, checkpoints, land confiscations, and daily humiliation keeps boiling over. Then, late in 1987, a traffic incident sparks something bigger. An Israeli military truck collides with a Palestinian car in Gaza, killing 4. Within days, protests erupt, first in the camps, then the streets. Rocks fly, so do bullets. The Intifada has begun. You walk through burning tires, angry chants, and tear gas clouds. Children some barely 12 throw stones at armored jeeps. Women block roads with furniture. Men paint slogans on walls by night and run from soldiers by day. Historians still argue whether the first Intifada was spontaneous or carefully planned. But for Gazans, it becomes a turning point. The strip isn't just occupied anymore, it's resisting. Israel cracks down hard. Curfews, mass arrests, beatings. Schools are closed for months. You pass through a home where the walls are covered in graffiti, political slogans, martyr portraits, and that odd hybrid of hope and fury that only youth can produce. Yet, amid the chaos, something new begins to stir. A different kind of resistance. One wrapped not in flags, but in faith. In 1988, the world hears a name for the first time: Hamas. Born in Gaza with roots in Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas emerges as a religious nationalist alternative to the secular Palestinian leadership. They run charities, operate mosques, organize soup kitchens. But also secretly at first. Then proudly they engage in armed resistance. You see their posters on telephone poles, their leaflets passed hand to hand. Their rise marks a shift, not just politically, but spiritually. The battle for Gaza isn't just about borders now. It's about identity, ideology, and how one resists when escape is no longer an option. You find yourself back on the beach, watching the moon reflect over the waves. The land behind you is full of fences, ghosts, and impossible decisions. And tomorrow? Well, it's never quiet for long. The beach is still here, quiet, if you squint your ears. But Gaza behind you is buzzing like a frayed wire. The first Intifada hasn't ended. Not really. The rocks keep flying, the protests keep swelling, and the Israeli response grows more entrenched. You wander past schools that open for 2 weeks, then close again for security reasons. Children teach each other math in alleyways. Graffiti becomes a second language. It's the early 1990s now. You smell something faint in the air. Not smoke this time. Talk. The word peace starts appearing in newspapers, carefully, with quotation marks, but it's there. Hushed meetings in Oslo. Smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. You hear the buzz surf at Rabin, handshakes, camera flashes, cautious applause. And then it happens. 1993's. The Oslo Accords, a framework is signed. A roadmap to peace, supposedly. The plan: Israel recognizes the Palestinian Liberation Organization as the representative of the Palestinian people. The PLO, in turn, recognizes Israel's right to exist. In theory, Gaza and parts of the West Bank will be transferred to limited Palestinian self-rule. You're in Gaza when the first Palestinian Authority officials arrive. They come with suits, security details, and posters of Yasser Arafat. There's celebration in the streets. Fireworks, doves, plastic chairs lining rooftops. After decades of occupation, it feels like something might be shifting. But even celebration in Gaza has a curfew. You walk through neighborhoods where people whisper doubts. Hamas, born from the ashes of the first Intifada, sent on board. They call Oslo a betrayal, a surrender. While the PA sets up ministries, Hamas builds more mosques and deepens its roots in the camps. The Strip is splitting, not just politically, but spiritually. Still, changes come. The Israeli military withdraws from parts of Gaza. Palestinian police patrol the streets. Flags flutter black, white, green, red. There's a rush to build. Infrastructure. Schools. Small businesses. The mood is tense, but hopeful. You catch the scent of shawarma and gunpowder, because Oslo doesn't stop the violence. Not really. Suicide bombings begin. Hamas and Islamic Jihad launch attacks inside Israel. Israel responds with targeted killings and closures. The peace process stumbles, then limps, then collapses. In 2000, a second intifada erupts. You feel the ground shift. This time, it's angrier, bloodier. The street protests of the late 80s morph into something more explosive, literally. You pass craters left by airstrikes, buildings pancaked by tanks, streets torn by clashes. Israel reoccupies parts of Gaza. Curfews return like old ghosts. Hope packs its bags. Historians still argue whether the Second Intifada was inevitable or triggered. Ariel Sharon's infamous visit to the Temple Mount may have lit the match, but the fuel had been leaking for years. In Gaza, daily life becomes a surreal dance. One moment, kids play soccer in a narrow street. The next, a drone zips by overhead. Shops close without warning. Blackouts become routine. The wall around Gaza, figurative for years, starts becoming literal. Israel begins building a security barrier. In the West Bank, it's concrete. Around Gaza, it's fences, cameras, sniper towers, and restricted zones. You walk through olive groves that suddenly become no-go areas. Farmers risk their lives for harvests. Sometimes they don't come back. And then, in 2005, something unthinkable happens. Israel disengages, unilaterally. They pull out all settlements from Gaza, 21 in total. Nearly 8,000 settlers are evacuated, often forcibly. The Israeli military leaves. For the first time in decades, Gaza is on paper free of direct occupation. You stand in the middle of a former settlement. The houses have been bulldozed. The greenhouses stripped. The dust hangs heavy, as if waiting for new stories. The world watches Gaza. What will it do with its chance? The answer is complicated. Power struggles begin almost immediately. Fatah, led by the Palestinian Authority, claims the Strip. Hamas, growing in strength and popularity, challenges them. In 2006, elections are held. Hamas wins a landslide victory in Gaza and major gains in the West Bank. The world blinks. The United States and the EU refuse to recognize the new Hamas government. Sanctions are imposed. Aid dries up. Inside Gaza, tension turns to confrontation. In 2007, things break. Gun battles erupt between Hamas and Fatah forces. It's not a war, it's a divorce. Brutal, fast, bloody. You pass a street where a billboard of Arafat is being torn down. Another one of a Hamas commander is going up. By the end of the week, Hamas controls Gaza. Fatah is gone. The Strip is now politically separate from the West Bank. One people, two governments, two visions, one very uneasy future. And then the walls close in further. Israel, calling Hamas a terrorist organization, imposes a blockade land-air. Sea. Egypt follows suit. The Strip becomes a cage. Goods are restricted. Fuel is rationed. Concrete is banned or limited. Fishing zones shrink. Import-export trade all but collapses. Quirky fact: during the early years of the blockade, Gazans dig hundreds of underground tunnels beneath the border with Egypt. They become lifelines for everything from cement to soda. Some tunnels are barely shoulder wide. Others are big enough for motorcycles. It's like a subway system for survival. But the world above doesn't stay quiet. In 2008, the tension explodes again. Operation Cast Lead. An Israeli military offensive following years of rocket fire from Gaza into southern Israel. The scale is staggering. Airstrikes pound Gaza for weeks. You walk through flattened neighborhoods, burned schools. A UN warehouse smoldering with phosphorus ash. Over 1,000 Palestinians are killed, many civilians. Israel suffers casualties too, mostly from rocket fire. The death toll isn't a statistic here, it's names, posters, phone numbers that stop ringing, and still nothing ends. The blockade tightens. Gaza's isolation grows. Donor money comes, but reconstruction is slow. Cement trickles in. Hospitals operate on diesel generators. Power outages stretch to 12, 16, sometimes 20 hours a day. You pass a wedding hall lit by a single string of bulbs, powered by a car battery. The bride smiles anyway. Then, 2012. Another war. 8 days of airstrikes and rockets. Another ceasefire. Then, 2014. 50 days, the worst yet. You don't even try to dodge the shrapnel now. You've learned to wait it out in corners of buildings still standing. Whole families shelter in UN schools that weren't meant to hold this much heartbreak. Entire city blocks are erased. Historians still argue whether the 2014 war was provoked or inevitable. But in Gaza, no one's counting who started it. They're just counting bodies and bricks. And yet life pushes through. Children go back to school, even if the school is a tent. Artists paint murals on bombed walls. A teenager starts flying kites made from plastic bags. You see a kid using a rusted tank shell as a flower pot. Somewhere, someone is frying falafel. Because Gaza doesn't give up, not exactly. It adapts. It rebuilds. Sometimes it protests. In 2018, massive demonstrations erupt along the Israeli fence, the Great March of Return. Tens of thousands of Gazans march, demanding the right to return to ancestral homes and an end to the blockade. Some bring flags, some bring slingshots. Some are just kids in sandals. You stand by as snipers open fire. Dozens are killed, thousands injured. The protests continue, off and on, for months. The demands never really change. The response doesn't either. And through all of it, the rockets, the tanks. The treaties that fizzle like soda left open to long. The Strip remains. Tired, defiant. A sliver of land carrying the weight of generations. You walk back to the shoreline. The sea still whispers like it always does. But now, there's a fence between you and it. You stand in the sand, toes curling into the cool grit, staring out at the Mediterranean. The waves roll in, then out, like they have for thousands of years. But now, just a few dozen meters from the shoreline, a gray naval vessel slices slowly across the horizon. Its wake isn't water, it's surveillance. Gaza Sea, like its sky and soil, no longer belongs entirely to the people who live beside it. It's the late 2010s now, and Gaza has become a place that exists in two dimensions at once: physical and symbolic. On one hand, it's just a stretch of coastal land, about 365 square kilometers. On the other hand, it's a pressure chamber, a hashtag. A case study in 21st century conflict, humanitarian aid, and geopolitical paralysis. You walk the length of Salah al-Din Road, one of Gaza's main arteries. You see contradictions everywhere. A falafel cart with a cracked solar panel strapped to its side. A hospital with broken elevators but working MRI machines. A cell phone store glowing with fluorescent lights powered by a generator the size of a small car, and hanging in the air. That same electricity, not just from the grid spotty as it is, but from the tension, always there, like static before a storm. By now, Gaza's demographics tell their own story. Over 2 million people live here, nearly half of them children, the median age. Around 18, you meet teenagers who lived through 4 wars and know the sound of a drone better than a violin. They speak in internet slang and political bitterness. Some dream of Canada, some dream of Jerusalem. Many dream of just a normal Tuesday. In the north, you see the remains of Beit Hanon's streets shattered during the last escalation. Concrete rubble. Walls with silhouettes where posters used to hang. Cats weaving through collapsed living rooms. In the south, Khan Yunis buzzes with reconstruction, welding sparks, sandbags, and too many unfinished projects to count. Quirky fact: some Gazans have started raising pigeons on their rooftops, not just for sport or food, but as a kind of quiet rebellion. You watch them release the birds into the dusk sky, where for a few minutes the blockade doesn't exist. The politics, though, are anything but airborne. Hamas still rules Gaza with a tight grip. Its social services are efficient. Its militias well organized. Its ideology fiercely anti-occupation, religiously driven, and unyielding defines nearly every decision in the Strip. But after more than a decade of rule, cracks are showing. Tensions simmer between Hamas and smaller militant groups like Islamic Jihad. Sometimes they coordinate, sometimes they bicker. Occasionally, they fire rockets independently, dragging everyone into another cycle of escalation. On the other side of the fence, Israel's strategy is a mix of deterrence and containment. It tightly controls the flow of goods into the Strip, allowing in fuel, medicine, construction materials, and food at a scale just enough to prevent total collapse. But the border crossings remain tightly monitored. Most Gazans cannot leave, ever. Not for weddings, not for funerals, not for university scholarships. Historians still argue whether this status quo is strategy or stalemate. Does the blockade serve security goals? Or is it a form of collective punishment? The answers depend on who you ask and which part of the wall they're standing behind. You pass a university lecture in Gaza City. The professor is using a flashlight because the power's gone out again. The students keep taking notes anyway. Most are studying English, engineering, medicine fields that require optimism, or at least stubbornness. But hope here is a complex emotion. You hear it in music. Gazan rappers blend Arabic lyrics with trap beats, venting about poverty, war, and love. One group rhymes about checkpoints and curfews, while filming their video on a rooftop covered in sandbags and satellite dishes. You smile, the beat slaps, the ceiling leaks. Then comes 2021, another war. It starts again with a spark. Protests in Jerusalem, clashes at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, tensions in Sheikh Jarrah. And then, in a flash, rockets fly from Gaza. Hundreds, thousands. Israel responds with airstrikes. Tower blocks fall. Families vanish. The cycle spins like a roulette wheel rigged by history. You walk the streets after a ceasefire and see the new scars. The same neighborhoods, the same patterns. Gaza has been rebuilt so many times, it's become a city made of fresh ruins. Children don't draw the sun in yellow anymore. They draw drones. In the aftermath, Egypt and Qatar broke a quiet agreement. Humanitarian aid trickles in. A few more trucks per day at the crossings. Few more fishing kilometers, granted. But the fundamental reality doesn't change. The border is still a wall, and the world still mostly watching. By now, Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on Earth, and one of the least mobile. Internet access exists, but only just. Some zones have 3G, some have none. Still, gaze and scroll, TikTok, and read tweets in between power cuts. You pass a teenager charging her phone with a solar panel the size of a dinner plate. She's watching a cat video. Normalcy, 1 pixel at a time. And yet, under the surface, a different kind of resistance is growing quiet, persistent, less photogenic. You meet doctors who trained under siege. Teachers who run classrooms with half the textbooks missing. Entrepreneurs selling coded apps to help Gazans find fuel or avoid roadblocks. It's survival scaled up. Quirky fact: Gaza now produces most of its own strawberries. Despite limited land, farmers have adapted vertical growing methods, cramming sweetness into tiny rows of green. You pick one, it's perfect. And slightly miraculous. Meanwhile, political reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah continues to be the punchline of a long, unfunny joke. Attempts are made sometimes in Cairo, sometimes in Doha, but they rarely stick. One side accuses the other of corruption. The other responds with accusations of authoritarianism. And the people of Gaza, they keep waiting for unity, for electricity, for anything to shift. You pass a mural of key symbol of the Nakba, the 1948 catastrophe. Underneath it, a child has scrawled a single word in chalk. Tomorrow, you don't answer. Because soon, it's 2023, and something does shift. Another explosion of violence. But this time, different. October 7th, Hamas launches a massive surprise attack on Israeli communities near Gaza. Thousands of rockets. Armed fighters breach the border fence, killing and kidnapping civilians. It's a moment that shocks even the seasoned. The world watches in horror. Grief floods the headlines, and Israel's response: swift, relentless, massive. You don't walk much during this time. The skies are too dangerous. Airstrikes hit residential towers, hospitals, even areas previously considered safe. The Israeli military calls for evacuations of northern Gaza. Over 1 million people are told to move south in a matter of hours. But where, exactly, are 2 million people supposed to go? You try to follow the exodus south along Salah al-Din Road. It's a human river. Children with backpacks. Elderly pushed in wheelchairs, entire families on donkey carts. The road becomes a slow-motion stampede. Water is scarce. Food scarcer. GPS apps still work barely, but there are no pins for safety. Historians will argue for decades about what happens next, but you live it. Whole neighborhoods are turned to dust. Thousands of civilians die. Humanitarian agencies say Gaza is unlivable. Fuel runs out. Hospitals shut down. Communications black out. It's not just a war anymore. It's a collapse, a vanishing. You find a makeshift shelter in a school in Deir al-Balah. The chalkboard still has multiplication tables on it. K. A child is sleeping on the teacher's desk. Another is drawing, this time, not drones, but waves. Endless blue waves. You look at it and think, maybe that's the only place left to run. You don't sleep much anymore. Not because it's loud, though it is, or because of the bright flashes outside the window, though they refrequent. You don't sleep because dreams feel too fragile here. Gaza in 2024 is a place suspended. Not between peace and war, But between collapse and something worse, you move through the South Nabi, because that's where everyone was told to go. Raif Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis. Dear Al-Bala. You pass rows of tents flapping under sand-laced winds, built from tarps, blankets, and leftover election posters. There's no infrastructure left to speak of. Water trickles from makeshift spigots. Food arrives in UN trucks, or it doesn't. And the border. Still sealed, still armed. Still staring back with cold eyes. Egypt's crossing at Raif opens briefly, sometimes for wounded or foreigners. But for most, it remains a locked gate. On the Israeli side, the fence bristles with drones and sensors. Every inch is monitored. Gaza's borders are no longer just about geography. They are a system, a control grid, an algorithm with a watch list. You try to leave for 10 minutes, and the entire world reminds you that you're not supposed to. Inside, desperation grows roots. A child sells cookies made from flour and lentils. A mother boils laundry water to cook rice. Plastic sheeting becomes both a window and a wall. And then, between the checkpoints and the rubble, someone starts a garden. Because that's how it is here. Resistance and adaptation, hand in hand. But political dynamics, even more volatile than the wind. Hamas is still officially in power, but after the October 2023 war, its grip begins to splinter. Some leaders vanish into tunnels, others die in airstrikes. Rumors swirl about negotiations in Cairo, Doha, Geneva. None feel real. You hear names like the Palestinian Authority, technocratic interim government, UN oversight, but on the ground, it's just neighborhoods trying to organize trash pickup and keep streetlights working on backup batteries. Historians still argue whether Gaza at this point is governed, managed, or simply endured. Is it still a place with politics, or just a humanitarian holding zone with flags? Quirky fact. During the blackout weeks, some Gazans started using pigeons again, not as a hobby, but to send messages. A teenager named Bilal even tried attaching handwritten notes to little vests made from thread and gauze. The birds made it farther than most phone calls. And then there's the tunnels. You've known about them for years. Everyone has. A vast hidden network beneath the surface, some for smuggling, some for military use, others for simply surviving. You pass a school with a crater beside it, the remains of what used to be an entrance to one of the hundreds of underground passages that crisscross the strip like veins. The tunnels are both real and metaphorical now. Gaza above ground is watched, bombed, and locked. But below, people move. Cables snake through the dark. Doctors operate. Militants coordinate. Secrets live. Israel's efforts to eliminate them grow more intense. Bunker busters, flooding operations. Sonic pulses. Still, the tunnels endure, because Gaza has always lived in margins and loopholes. But the strip isn't just resisting, it's documenting. You pass a young woman with a cracked iPhone and a portable solar charger. She's live streaming bomb damage, narrating in a whisper. This was our kitchen. My brother's room was here. That's his shoe. She has 30,000 followers. None of them live here. And yet, Gaza becomes more connected in its isolation. Videos go viral. Hashtags trend. People in Brazil, Sweden, Indonesia learn the shape of neighborhoods they'll never visit. The strip's borders may be sealed, but its images leak like blood through gauze. You move through the ruins of a university now functioning as a shelter. Philosophy lectures have been replaced by emergency aid distribution. Still, you hear someone reading aloud from Aristotle, just loud enough for a few dazed students to hear. Because what else can you do but keep trying to understand the human condition? By now, everyone you meet is an expert in survival logistics. They know how many liters of fuel a generator can run before sputtering. They can calculate ration shares for 6 people using only a half kilo of rice. They can recognize the difference between a surveillance drone and a strike drone by the pitch of its hum. It's knowledge they never wanted, but it's theirs now. The younger generation, the ones born around 2006, during the first Hamas election victory are. Adults now, many have never left the Strip, never seen an airport, never been in a car without a checkpoint at the end of the road. Some are angry, some are numb, some are brilliant. You meet a boy named Sami who builds Wi-Fi signal boosters from salvaged electronics. Another Farah is running an underground library in a garage. It's 600 books, all dog-eared and patched with masking tape. People line up for hours to borrow. This is Gaza's education system now. Patched, passionate, and partially illegal. Occasionally, you catch wind of diplomacy. A ceasefire proposal. A reconstruction plan. International conferences with names like Pathway to Peace and Humanitarian Corridors Roundtable. Experts argue about how to open Gaza up without opening old wounds. Meanwhile, no one has consistent electricity, and the pharmacy down the street has been empty since February. Quirky detail. A recent grassroots movement in Gaza tried to create border art, murals, and installations made right up against the fences, meant to show hope or protest or sometimes just absurdity. One piece was a giant kite painted on a wall. Another was a pair of painted wings where kids took pictures, pretending to fly. The photos went viral. The wall stayed. You find yourself back at the waterline. Even here, where the sky is wide and the breeze still smells like salt, the restrictions remain. The fishing zone, when permitted, is usually capped at 6 nautical miles, sometimes less. The boats that go beyond it are often shot at or detained. Sometimes they vanish. But still, men rise before dawn, cast their nets, and pray. Not for fish, necessarily. It's just for one day that doesn't get worse. And maybe it will come, maybe not. Maybe the next delegation will arrive, suited and solemn, and finally start something real. Or maybe they'll sly out 2 days later and say the parties are not ready. Historians still argue whether any of these plans are meant to succeed or just to be seen failing in public. But in Gaza, no one waits for white papers. The teachers teach. The mechanics patch ancient scooters with duct tape. The barbers cut hair using shears powered by car batteries. Kids climb over rubble to get to school. They sing, they fight, they dream. You pass a girl reciting a poem she wrote. If I had a passport, I would go to the sky, just to ask the clouds what they see when they look down. She's 10 and she's tired. So are you. The road ahead doesn't promise much, but you keep walking. Past the queues at water stations. Past the twisted rebar and spray-painted slogans. Past the ghosts of Oslo in October and every summer that came with fire. Because this isn't over. It never really was. You Wakor, maybe you never fully slept too. The rattle of metal pots and distant megaphones. Another aid delivery is rumored. The whole neighborhood shifts toward the idea of food like iron filings to a magnet. You follow the slow shuffle of sandals along the road. No one rushes. Rushing gets you nowhere. It's sometime in 2025, and the Gaza Strip's borders are still exactly where they were. But what they mean, that keeps changing. These aren't lines on a map anymore. They're walls, embargoes, policies, trauma, theories, hashtags, slogans, and maybe worst of all, shrugs. You're standing near the Erez crossing again, or what's left of it. The northern border between Gaza and Israel has become less a crossing and more a monument to paralysis. Once, people used to go through it for work permits, medical visits, the rare family reunion. Now, most just stand near it, hoping that a foreign journalist or diplomat might make eye contact. No one does. Trade through these borders used to flow, then trickle, then nearly stop. Israel allows some goods in, mostly after international pressure or behind closed-door negotiations. Cement, maybe. On odd Tuesdays, canned food, sometimes books. Don't even ask. But then there's the tunnels. Yes, they're still there, not like before. Many collapsed, some were bombed. But new ones keep surfacing. And where there are tunnels, there's trade. Soda, cigarettes, SIM cards, even electric scooters, all dragged beneath the sand like contraband dreams. Quirky fact: at one point, a Gaza tunnel was wide enough to drive a car through. Someone tried to move an entire pizza oven that way. Not the ingredients, the oven itself. But even below ground, the logic of borders creeps in. The deeper the tunnel, the greater the risk. And with every tunnel collapsed, the message is the same. Gaza isn't supposed to connect with anything. Then there's the sea. To the west, the Mediterranean keeps breathing in slow, lazy swells. But boats can only go out a few kilometers. On calm days, you see fishing skiffs hugging the invisible line, hoping not to drift. Israeli naval patrols enforce the limits strictly. One extra nautical mile and you might be stopped, detained, or worse. Still, people fish. Because if Gaza's borders are solid, the people inside them are not. You pass a roadside fish stall selling sardines caught 5 hours ago. The vendor tells you how he lost half his nets last week when a patrol boat veered too close. Then he laughs. Because what else can you do? Meanwhile, inside the strip, people find other ways to move. Music gets smuggled in on memory cards. TikTok trends arrive despite the 2G data speeds. A dentist in Deir al-Balah starts doing Zoom consultations for refugees in Lebanon, using a battery-powered router balanced on a shelf of gauze. It's a kind of movement, even if your body stays put. But borders don't only separate, they squeeze. In Raif, down south, you see lines forming at the Egypt border crossing again. The gate is closed, of course, but the rumors are strong today. Maybe a medical convoy. Maybe a few student visas. The lucky names are read out loud, like lottery winners. Everyone else waits. Historians still argue whether the border with Egypt was ever meant to be a lifeline or just a pressure valve. It's opened and closed so many times it feels like a slot machine operated from Cairo. Still, Egyptians often feel closer, culturally, linguistically, than the sterile Israeli barrier up north. But Egypt, too, fears instability. So the southern gate stays mostly locked. When it opens, it's never fully, and always with conditions. And so Gaza becomes what it already was, a sealed ecosystem. An economy of scarcity. A social experiment in forced endurance. You walk into a market where bartering has made a comeback. Eggs for batteries, fuel for clothes. A man offers to fix your sandals in exchange for 20 minutes on your phone's hotspot. He even throws in an extra soul patch. It's capitalism, Gaza style, haggled, handmade, and built on mutual exhaustion. Quirky detail. Due to constant blackouts, Gazans have repurposed old car alternators to power fridges and Wi-Fi routers. A teenager named Nur has even written a manual handwritten, photocopied, then passed around like samizdat. Her diagram for wiring a TV to a stationary bike. Legendary. And still borders define it all. The outer fence, sure, but also the inner ones. Mental fences. Divides between Gaza and the West Bank, between Hamas and Fatah, between dreamers and the resigned. You meet a cab driver who refuses to talk politics. Not because he's afraid though, maybe he is, but because he's tired. Borders are just ideas people shoot each other over, he says, hands on the wheel. But then he adds, still, it'd be nice to cross one someday. You pass a mural of Jerusalem's Dome of the Rock painted across the side of a ruined building. Below it, a border fence winds like barbed ivy. Someone scrawled in Arabic, next year, we climb. It's not clear what. The wall, the dream. Does it matter? Because no matter how firmly the borders are drawn, people still challenge them not with bulldozers, then with memories. Everyone here has an ancestral village across the line. Yibna, Ashkelon, Meidel, ask an elder. And they'll tell you how many olive trees their grandfather planted there. They might even still have the land deed, or the key. Historians still argue whether the right of return is a fantasy, a right, or a bargaining chip. But for the refugees inside Gaza, who make up roughly 70% of the population, it's more like gravity. Unseen, constant, always pulling backward. And yet, the future keeps arriving. New families, new walls, new apps. You walk into a barber shop where the buzz cut is interrupted by a blackout. The barber laughs, pulls out a headlamp, and keeps going. You tip him in canned beans. He says, "I accept PayPal too, but only if you know someone in Amman." Somehow, it works. You move through Nusayrat camp where kids are playing soccer barefoot on a patch of land between two piles of rubble. The goals are made of twisted metal. The ball is half flat. The score? Probably irrelevant, but they're playing. You smile because this is Gaza's answer to borders. Not escape, not surrender. Just play anyway. Live anyway. You find yourself again near the coast, near one of the floating buoys that marks the end of the fishing zone. It looks absurd, bobbing there like a toy. Beyond it, the sea stretches into infinity. But for Gazans, it may as well be a brick wall. Still, someone's cast a line just beyond it. Maybe they'll pull in a fish. Maybe they won't, but they're reaching. And sometimes, that's all Gaza can do. You're in a line again. This time it's not for food or water or fuel or news, though it could easily be for any of those. This time, it's for documents. A makeshift office tucked into a former school where people wait to register births, deaths, marriages, life continuing, even if just on paper. A man ahead of you is holding a baby wrapped in a scarf and a stack of faded certificates. He doesn't flinch when a nearby window shudders from a distant thud, because in Gaza, the paperwork never stops. Even borders, in the end, are built out of documents. And that's where you are now, in the quieter part of the storm. The part where borders aren't just fences or checkpoints, they're piles of forms, waiting lists, permits, biometric scans, and emails that never get replies. You've entered the administrative maze of the Gaza Strip, where the borders wrap around not just geography, but identity. You pass a government worker flipping through dusty folders, names, numbers, family trees. The records stretch back decades because history here isn't academic, it's evidence. Proof that you were born, that you lived here, that you still exist. In some ways, it's all anyone has. You walk into a lawyer's office with half a roof. The clients waiting here aren't looking to sue anyone, they re-looking for legal clarity in a place that keeps slipping through definitions. Are they citizens, residents, stateless, refugees? The answer, usually, is yes and no, and it depends. Historians still argue whether Gaza's legal status is occupation, autonomy, or something in between. Israel withdrew troops and settlers in 2005, but maintains air and sea control, border authority, and population registry. So, is it still occupying? The debate rages in academic journals, while the people inside simply wait for the water to come back on. You meet a woman named Selwa trying to get a permit to travel to Jerusalem for cancer treatment. She's had 3 approvals revoked in 2 years. Her latest one expired while she was waiting for transport coordination. Maybe 4th time lucky, she jokes. But her eyes don't. You pass a man who's been denied a work permit to Israel since 1994. He still applies every 6 months. Just to annoy them, he says. And what about passports? You open one? It says Palestinian Authority, Gaza Strip. The color's not quite red, not quite brown. Most countries don't recognize it. Many airlines won't accept it. It's a document that opens almost no doors, but it's all you have. And losing it can be worse than never having had it at all. Quirky fact: for a while, Gazans used to joke that getting an Egyptian passport stamp was harder than meeting Beyoncé. Both were nearly mythical, and both required extreme connections. And still, the bureaucracy rolls on. You find yourself inside the UNRWA compound, where dozens of clerks shuffle papers behind bulletproof glass. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency runs much of life here: schools, clinics, food distribution centers. Without it, Gaza would collapse. With it, Gaza simply limps. You see children in blue and white uniforms, UNRWA school. Colors reciting lessons about fractions and the water cycle, while outside, the streets buckle from sewage leaks. It's like two worlds stacked unevenly. Education on top, emergency below. One teacher is explaining the history of Gaza's borders. She uses a chalkboard to draw the lines. Ottoman Empire, British Mandate, Egyptian control, Israeli occupation, Palestinian Authority, Hamas rule. The kids blink, trying to keep up. Then she erases it all in one swipe. Borders can be drawn and erased, she says softly. But you're still here. Later, you visit a civil engineer who works in what's left of the municipal planning office. He shows you a map of Gaza overlaid with zoning laws. It's color-coded, beautiful, in a way, until you realize none of it is enforceable. Too much of the strip has been bombed, rebuilt, rezoned, abandoned, and redrawn. You can't plan a city, he says, if the city keeps getting cratered. And yet, they try. He tells you about a proposal for a new coastal road. It would run from Rafe to Gaza City. Solar streetlights, tree plantings, bike paths. We're designing it, he says, just in case. You smile. That's Gaza in 2 words. Just in case. The sense of limbo permeates everything. You visit a young woman editing wedding photos in her darkened studio, powered by 2 car batteries and a prayer. She's never been outside Gaza, but her work travels. One of her edited albums just made it to Istanbul. She beams. My photos have crossed the border, she says. You nod, because sometimes that's enough. Then you enter a cemetery on the eastern edge of Gaza City. It's overgrown, wild. But even here, the boundaries matter. Some graves are marked with metal plaques provided by the municipality. Others are just cinder blocks with names scratched into them. A few are anonymous, and the border. Just beyond the fence, the Israeli side looms watchtowers and floodlights. Even death, it seems, is measured in meters. You sit with an old man near the edge of the graveyard. He remembers when the fence wasn't electrified, when there were trees instead of towers. I used to sneak across to pick oranges, he tells you. Now, I can't even bury my cousin near his own land. Quirky detail. There's a legend in Gaza about a donkey who wandered across the border fence in the 1980s and returned a week later wearing an Israeli military blanket. No one knows if it's true, but it's told like scripture. The donkey had more freedom of movement than most people now, and yet people persist. You pass by a dance class held in a former furniture store. The windows are sandbagged, the music's on low volume, but the kids are spinning. One boy wears a hoodie that says NYC. He's never left Jobley Camp. Across the road, a group of women are weaving rugs using scraps of UN8 sacks dyed in bright colors. One has embroidered the Gaza skyline into hers. Even if I can't leave, she says, at least I can wrap myself in the city. You think about that as the sun dips low, because borders, in the end, are not just barriers. They're stories we tell and retell until they harden into walls or melt into memory. In Gaza, they've done both. You walk home, if you can call it that, past a wall where someone has spray painted the word someday. No punctuation, no explanation. Just the one word scrawled across the chipped concrete like a promise that's taken the shape of graffiti. And for now, that's enough. You wake to the sound of goats. Not missiles, not generators, not the clipped static of military radios, just goats. Bleating softly beneath a window, their owner calling them with a plastic bucket half full of something vaguely edible. And for a moment, Gaza feels like what it once was. Farmland, open air, the kind of place where the loudest thing at dawn is livestock. You follow the man down a narrow alley that smells like dust and cardamom. His name is Nabi, and his grandfather used to own land in Al-Fallujah before 1948. Back when borders were softer and roads between Gaza and Hebron were still open. Nabi points to an old metal key hanging in his doorway. It doesn't fit any lock anymore. Doesn't need to. It's not a key to a door, it's a key to a story. In this section of the strip, people don't just remember history, they wear it. The embroidery on dresses, each stitch tells where a family came from. Hebron, Safa Jaffa. Gaza may be isolated, bombed, barricaded, but inside its homes, 1,000 other places still live. The identity here is layered. Gazan, Palestinian, refugee, Muslim. Christian, hopeful, bitter, proud, exhausted, and always waiting. You move through Beach Camp Al-Shot, where some of the oldest refugee families live. Kids chase each other over foundations poured in 1950. Clotheslines hang above every alley like festive bunting, though the mood isn't always festive. Still, there's music playing from a battered speaker, a song about return, recorded before the singer was born. And here, identity is passed like a family recipe, oral, imperfect. Sometimes contradictory, but always sacred. You meet Nur again, the teenager with the solar manual. She's helping her grandmother catalog family recipes in a spiral notebook. Makluba, frika soup, fish, sayadiyah. Her grandmother doesn't use measurements, so Nur improvises. 2 scoops and a memory, she writes beside one line. Quirky fact. Some Gazans preserve olives, using an old Egyptian method, burying them in salt-lined clay jars, then hiding the jars beneath chicken coops to avoid confiscation during raids. It's both culinary tradition and tactical genius. But it's not just food and fabric. You visit a poetry slam held in the courtyard of a damaged school. The audience is mostly young, mostly restless, and mostly excellent at rhyming trauma with policy. One boy recites a piece titled 4 Walls and Wi-Fi. Another girl reads a poem made entirely of checkpoint names. You ask where they learned this? They say, YouTube. Because while Gaza's borders may keep out goods, ideas still seep in on scratched DVDs, downloaded PDFs, proxy servers, and whispered recommendations. One minute you're watching a TED Talk in a tent. The next, you're writing a spoken word poem about international law. And through it all, the music, Gaza's hip-hop scene has grown quietly but fiercely. Artists rap in Arabic, sometimes French or English, layering beats under lyrics about street power cuts, broken promises, inherited displacement. Their makeshift studios hum with old laptops, egg carton soundproofing, and borrowed mix. You sit in on a session. The beat kicks in. The hook goes. They gave me a cage and called it a home. They drew me a map, but I colored my own. You nod along. 'Cause here's the thing, this culture, this identitized defiance through creation. It's the simple act of saying, I exist in 1,000 tiny ways every day through art, through memory, through bread shared with neighbors and flags stitched on backpacks. Historians still argue whether Gaza has a unique identity separate from the broader Palestinian cause. Some say, it's a siege, the politics, the coastal rhythm, the dialect. Others say, no, it's part of a single tapestry stretching from the river to the sea. But in the meantime, Gazans are busy living that question. You pass a wedding party squeezed between concrete slabs. The bride is wearing a white dress borrowed from 5 cousins ago. The groom dances with his brothers while kids toss rice made from dried potato flakes. There's no electricity, but someone's rigged up speakers to a car battery. It's loud, it's joyful, it's fragile, and it's very, very real. Later in Khan Yunis, you meet a man restoring old radios. Not to use them, but to keep them. He has models from the 1930s to the 1970s, each one labeled with the city it once received best. Cairo, Damascus, Beirut. They used to speak to us, he says. Now we only hear ourselves. You stay quiet for a moment, because you understand, now this place, sealed tight by borders, is still echoing with outside voices. Not because they're allowed in, but because they were here once. And some echoes refuse to fade. Then there's the humor. Yes, Gaza laughs. In dark cafes, lit by cell phone flashlights, people tell jokes about the power outages, about the aid convoys, about the guy who tried to start a fast food chain called KFC Gaza using smuggler's chicken. The punchline, it almost worked. Quirky fact. For a short while, KFC deliveries did come to Gaza via tunnel. They were smuggled from Egypt, reheated on the way, and cost more than a full day's wages. They called it Kentucky Fried Contraband. Humor here isn't just relief's identity, a refusal to let tragedy be the only thing people remember. And as night falls, you're invited into a home for tea. The family lays out cushions, pours the thick, cardamom-laced brew, and asks the oldest son to recite verses from the Quran. His voice is clear, melodic, tired, but full. You look around, framed embroidery on the wall, cracked but working TV, posters of Jerusalem, a corner with textbooks and a USB fan. The room is small, but the story it tells is huge, and it's theirs. No army, no border, no blockade can erase that. Because Gaza's cultural identity isn't just about resistance. It's about presence, about insisting, again and again, in every corner and every language. We are still here. Even the kids know this. You ask a girl at an Unwind school what she wants to be when she grows up. She says, a fashion designer. You ask what kind. She says, one that makes armor look good. She's 11, and she's paying attention. You leave the house as the power flickers off again, plunging the street into moonlight and generator hum. Down the road, someone's playing an oud, softly, a tune older than anyone here. You follow it without speaking. Because Gaza doesn't need narration, it's already speaking. And you're listening. You move through the ruins like a pilgrim in reverse, searching not for what was once sacred, but for what still holds meaning. And here in Gaza, meaning doesn't hide in museums. It hides in shadows, in rubble, in questions without answers. You re-standing before what's left of a centuries-old Canaan ottoman. Caravanserai tucked between apartment blocks and dust. Most people walk past it without noticing. But an elderly man gestures for you to come closer. He taps the ancient stones. This, he says, was for travelers. Now, we stay still. He's not just being poetic. Gaza's archaeological sites, sits, bones, and foundations have suffered just as much as its people. Many have vanished under roads, tanks, new buildings. Others are uncovered briefly, only to be buried again when the next airstrike hits. Even ruins can't rest here. You make your way toward Tel al-Ajul, a mound near the coast, where archaeologists once uncovered Bronze Age palaces and Egyptian amulets. Today, it's mostly weeds and whispers. A shepherd grazes his goats nearby. They say Pharaoh's wife came here. He shrugs. But now, it's just a good place for grass. Still, you kneel and brush aside some earth. A shard of pottery. A hint. The ghosts of ancient traders, warriors, potters, and priests are everywhere. Historians still argue whether Gaza's early civilizations were independent city-states or colonies of more powerful empires: Canaanite, Philistine, Egyptian, all of the above. The answers are delicate, like the artifacts themselves. In the 1930s, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie dug here and found golden scarabs and fine pottery. But when he left, the dig stopped. And now, most Gazans don't even know his name. You ask a teenager nearby if he's heard of the excavation. He says, "I think my cousin had a scarab tattoo once." You smile. Close enough. Quirky fact. At one point, a group of young Gazans found what they thought was a Roman mosaic while digging a foundation. Instead of calling authorities, they took selfies with it, then covered it back up. Better that way, they said. No one will bomb a mystery. And then there's the stone tower. Not far from the heart of Gaza City stands an odd, conical structure, kind of solid stone pillar. It's perfectly stacked without cement. Locals call it Burj Al Sabi, but its origin is debated. Was it a medieval watchtower, a granary, a Roman-era silo? Historians still argue, but most Gazans just pass it on the way to buy falafel. You walk around it, fingers trailing over cold limestone, imagining the hands that placed each stone. Maybe it was a symbol, a warning, a guide. Now, it's mostly a backdrop for wedding photos, but not all mysteries are ancient. Beneath Gaza lies another kind of archaeology, one that future historians may one day unearth. The tunnels, miles of reinforced passageways, some wide enough for vehicles, some barely crawl spaces. Built by Hamas and others, they've become part of Gaza's subterranean identity. They're not just military, some are escape routes. Others carry goods. A fuel legend has it once had electric fans and tile floors. You hear about one tunnel that supposedly led straight into a mango orchard in Egypt. Too bad the mangoes were always underripe, someone jokes. But these tunnels are also tombs. Many have collapsed. Some were sealed with no exit. And some still hum with motion, far below the feet of children learning long division. Historians may never agree on what to call them: defense infrastructure, desperate innovation, violation of sovereignty. But here, they're part of the landscape. You move through the Great Omari Mosque, Gaza's oldest active site of worship. Built on top of a Byzantine church, which itself stood on a Roman temple, which itself may have been built over a Philistine shrine. The mosque is both sacred site and archaeological layer cake. Inside, an imam is reciting quietly. Outside, a child chases a plastic bag in the wind. You wonder how many generations have passed through this exact doorway barefoot, burdened, bowed, or just curious. You run your hand along the old marble imported centuries ago and imagine a time before border walls, before siege, before the city itself forgot what peace felt like. Then you remember, some mysteries are newer. In 2020, construction workers in Gaza discovered a mosaic beneath an olive grove, perfectly preserved, vibrant as the day it was laid. For a moment, it captured the world's attention. A forgotten Roman floor, sunken beneath centuries of soil, waiting to be seen. But funding never came. Protection never arrived. The war resumed. And so, the mosaic now lives under a tarp, visited by goats more often than scholars. Quirky fact: one Gazan artist recreated the mosaic using bottle caps and candy wrappers. It's on display in a local youth center. Our version is bulletproof, he says, smiling. Because here, art must be both beautiful and durable. You step into a library with no roof. The books are sorted by weight. Not title-heavier ones hold down the plastic sheeting when the wind kicks up. Inside, a boy is reading about ancient Phoenicia. You ask if he believes Gaza was once part of that seafaring empire. He shrugs. Maybe. We've always been surrounded by water and enemies. He's not wrong. You thumb through a book and find a photocopied diagram of ancient Gaza's city gates. East, west, north, south, all for now sealed, renamed, or replaced by checkpoints. The diagram looks like fantasy. And yet, people remember. The city, despite it all, knows its own shape. The old quarter, the Ottoman walls, the ancient well in Jabalia. Ask any elder, and they'll point that was where the cinnamon sellers were. That was the house with the lion-shaped door knocker. Even the street names carry echoes. Al-Nasr, Omar Mukhtar, Al-Wida. Not just roads, but poems. Some of those roads now lead nowhere. Some end at fences, but the names endure. You meet a local historian who's documenting oral legends passed through families' tales of hidden treasure. Saints who turned bullets into water, stones that sing if touched at the right time. These aren't myths, he says. They're how we preserve what the wars can't destroy. You nod. Because stories in Gaza are sturdier than steel. You close the day in a small room with hand-drawn maps on the wall. One shows Gaza in 3000 BCE, another in 1947, another with dotted lines and hopeful arrows, pointing outward dreams of corridors, connections, open skies. The boy who drew them stands beside you. "I want to be an archaeologist," he says, "but I think I already am. Every step here is on top of something old." You smile and point to the map labeled Someday. He nods. "That's my favorite one." The wind shifts. You notice it as you walk down Salah al-Din, road named after the legendary sultan who once reclaimed Jerusalem. The name is etched in history, in textbooks, and on every directional sign in Gaza. But tonight, the street smells different, not just of diesel and smoke, but of change. A soft, strange breeze that whispers of something else. And in Gaza, even a change in wind feels political. You pass a newsstand, that is, a plastic table holding 3 battered copies of a foreign newspaper from last week. The headline reads, "Regional Alignment Shifting Gaza's Future Under Review," whatever that means. Because here, headlines are either too late, too vague, or too cruel. But something is changing. Talks have resumed not just between Israel and Hamas, but in wider circles, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, the US, even some Gulf states. People use phrases like framework agreement and normalized engagement and technical interim solutions. All of it foggy, all of it slow. You ask an old man sitting at a tea stall what he thinks of it. "New season, same script," he mutters. But the youth, they're watching closely. On Telegram, in WhatsApp groups, through Lori's news videos squeezed through digital bottlenecks. They follow each headline, each envoy's plane landing. Some are skeptical, others cautiously hopeful, and still others are busy building their own future, quietly behind the scenes. You meet Amal, 24, who runs a coding workshop for teenagers. No building, just a rented generator, 6 laptops, and a chalkboard. "Tech is our borderless space," she tells you. No checkpoint can stop JavaScript. She's not wrong. In a container stacked behind a former bakery, a startup hub hums to life every night from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. when the electricity is most stable. Young men and women cluster around borrowed screens, trading ideas, coding, designing, translating, building. Most of their clients live outside Gaza, Canada, Germany, Brazil. None of them know that the people delivering their apps do so by candlelight. Under drones, through patchy 3G networks. Quirky fact: one Gazan graphic designer photoshopped power lines into her digital art so perfectly that a client asked if she could add a bit more drone hum to the background. She laughed for 10 minutes before responding, because even progress here wears the stamp of siege. But back to the wind. It carries rumors now of demilitarization for access proposals, of international oversight, of long-term reconstruction plans, of seaport supervision, and the possibility, just the possibility, of airports returning to discussion. Historians still argue whether Gaza's first airport, built in the late 1990s with international fanfare, was ever meant to last. It was bombed a few years later. Its runway now lies cracked, silent, a parking lot for goats. But the image of it, a place to depart lives on, and maybe now someone's trying again. You meet a group of university students studying architecture under tarpaulins. They've designed a theoretical new terminal building, solar-powered, minimalist. It faces west, one of them says. Because that's the direction we've never been allowed to go. You don't know what to say to that, so you just nod. In Raif, the crossing to Egypt opens for 2 days. People crowd the border terminal with passports and plastic bags and printed out hospital referrals. It's chaos, but it's movement. A trickle of something beyond the fence. A teenage boy waves goodbye to his mother and yells, "Don't worry, I'll video call from the other side." And everyone laughs, not because it's funny, but because it feels like science fiction. And still, the wind blows. It rustles the edge of political posters' faces of leaders who haven't changed in decades. But lately, fewer people stop to read them. You overhear two young women arguing whether to vote in the next election, if there even is one. Voting for what? One says. For the chance to dream out loud, the other replies. That evening, you sit in on a community meeting about reconstruction planning. It's held in a mosque courtyard. No power, but plenty of candles and questions. Engineers, teachers, even former militants. They argue about roads, housing, agriculture. One man proposes rooftop gardens to make the city greener. Another interrupts, let's make sure we have a city first. Quirky detail. An initiative called Seeds for Gaza recently smuggled heirloom tomato seeds into the strip. They came inside the hollow handles of donated umbrellas. Now, those tomatoes grow in schoolyards, prison courtyards, and between the rubble of bombed mosques. You taste one. It's absurdly sweet. Then comes the night call. Not for prayer, but for hope. In the center of Gaza City, a group of musicians gather with drums, ouds, and a single electric keyboard running off a motorcycle battery. They begin to play softly, not folk songs or protest anthems, but lullabies. Songs written for a future they don't fully believe in, but sing to anyway. You sit down. So do 10, 20, 30 others. Someone lights incense. Someone else hands out dates. A girl begins to hum a harmony so pure it feels like light slipping through a curtain. Historians still argue whether music changes anything, but in Gaza. Tonight, it changes this moment, and that may be enough. Because borders don't just block people in, they block stories out. And Gaza's story has to often been told by someone else. In someone else's language, with someone else's agenda. But lately, you notice more cameras facing inward, more books being written by local authors, more podcasts in Arabic, more short films set in alleys they know best, more memoirs from kids who aren't waiting to be grown to speak. You meet Sammy, again the one who once boosted Wi-Fi using scrap metal. He's writing a novel now. You ask what it's about. He says it's science fiction, about a city floating over the sea, kind of like us, only higher. You ask him how it ends. He smiles. I haven't decided yet, neither has Gaza. You hear it before you see it. A slow, rhythmic chant rising from a school courtyard. Not angry, not loud, but unmistakably full. A group of teenage girls reciting a poem in unison, half melody. You stop to listen, drawn by the cadence. It's not political, not directly. It's a poem about jasmine growing between stones. About voices too wide to be bottled. About names written in sand that don't wash away. You blink. This is not the Gaza you usually hear about, but it's the Gaza that continues, quietly, every day. You slip into a classroom where a mural stretches across the back wall. It's painted in soft colors. Sea sky, oranges, and olive trees. Beneath it, a quote in Arabic reads, "The land docenti ask for your papers, asks for your patience." The teacher is explaining the difference between exile and diaspora. A student raises her hand. But what if we've never left Gaza? Are we still exiled? The room goes still. Even the fan pauses. And then someone murmurs, maybe we're exiled from time, not just space. You leave quietly, unsure whether you're walking through history or memory. But here, in this walled-off world, the two often blur. Culture in Gaza isn't preserved like a fossil. It breathes, pulses, adapts. It's not trapped. It's curated. Day by day, by everyone, in ways small and vast. You pass a boy practicing dayback, alone in the street, earbuds in. He stomps in perfect rhythm beside the ruins of what used to be a travel agency. The irony isn't lost on you. He moves like he's going somewhere. And maybe he is. Music echoes from a window above an old Kulthum ballad woven through with trap beats. a remix from a local producer who uploads his work from a rooftop where the signal is best. He says his latest track has 10,000 plays in Algeria. "I'm international now," he grins. "Even if my feet never leave." That's the reality here. Culture as a form of travel, of soft resistance, stretching out into the world even as the walls stay high. Historians still argue whether Gaza's isolation has helped preserve its cultural traditions, whether it has forced them to change more rapidly. Some say it's a museum, others call it a forge. But no one disputes this. Identity here is active, dynamic, alive. You stop by a tattoo parlor. Yes, there's a tattoo scene in Gaza. Underground, yes, but real. A 27-year-old artist inks olive branches and calligraphy on wrists and shoulders. His most requested phrase, "In spite of," he says it works for everything. Quirky fact, because tattoo ink is hard to get through the blockade. Local artists have learned to make pigment from crushed charcoal and certain plant dyes. It's not perfect, but then again nothing here is. Still, it lasts. You're invited to a poetry night held in the back of a grocery store. Shelves pushed aside. Tea in paper cups. The mic is a hairbrush. The poems are sharp, funny, painful, brave. One girl opens with, "My home has 3 walls and 1 window. I write poems to make the 4th." People snap, clap. Someone cries. This is what cultural memory looks like in Gaza, not dusty archives or old museums, but moments like this. Preserved in people, in rhythm, in voice. Later, you sit with an old man who recites proverbs by heart. One for every occasion. One for every kind of weather. He offers you walnuts and stories, both cracked open slowly. He tells you about Gaza before the fences. Before the tanks. "There was a theater in the 60s, he says, eyes glinting. "We saw plays from Cairo. One time, a Lebanese singer came. Wore gold shoes. You ask what happened to the theater. He shrugs. The walls grew faster than the curtains. Still, he remembers the lines from an old play. Recites them like prayer. Because performance here isn't a profession, it's inheritance. In an alley in Rafe, a boy paints his family's history on a wall. Not in a metaphorical sense. Literally, he's painting portraits his grandparents. The donkey they fled with in 1948. Their tent, their house in Beersheba, and finally, the cinder block home he was born in. He runs out of paint halfway through. Says he'll finish next week. You believe him? In the next neighborhood, a wedding procession winds through broken streets. Drums, ululation, sparklers, and a Bluetooth speaker strapped to a tricycle. The bride dances between potholes in a white dress stained with road dust. She laughs anyway, because in Gaza, joy is a form of rebellion. You ask a teenager named Leon what she's most proud of. She thinks for a second. "I can braid my hair in total darkness," she says. Then she adds, "Also, I wrote a song." She hums a few lines. It's soft, like sea foam. She uploads it that night using a friend's Wi-Fi. Tags it, #Gaza sleeps but dreams. You smile, because that's exactly what this place does. Even faith takes on layers here. You visit a Sufi gathering held in a collapsed courtyard. Men sway in unison, reciting God's names over and over until the sky feels near. A young boy clutches a small drum. He's barely 5, but he taps the rhythm perfectly. They say spirituality in Gaza deepens during war. You believe it? There's a softness to the way people pray here. Not as bargaining, not as fear, just presence. Breath. Historians still debate how much religion shapes Gaza's politics and daily life. Some argue it's a response to trauma. Others say it's always been central. Either way, you see it lived, not theorized. You pause at a small bookshop, still operating under candlelight. The owner recommends Mahmoud Darwish. Everyone here does. But he also suggests Ghassan Kanafani. For the fire, he says. And the tenderness. You buy both. Even if you won't sleep tonight, you'll read. Outside, the air is thick with that peculiar Gaza twilight where electricity flickers. But the city doesn't. You pass a group of children making shadow puppets on a crumbling wall. One puppet is a bird. Another is a soldier. A third is a balloon. They giggle. Then the generator hum fades and the shadows vanish. But not the laughter. And not the stories. Because Gaza remembers in its skin, in its buildings. In the way a mother wraps bread in newspaper from 1992. In the way teenagers turn scrap metal into sculptures. In the way everyone keeps teaching their children the names of places they've never seen. Hebron, Jaffa, Beit, Taras. You hear them like a heartbeat. And suddenly you realize Gaza isn't stuck in history. It is history, and it's writing itself with every breath. You stand at the shoreline. It's early, so early, the sea still feels like it belongs to dreams. The sky is soft, cotton-wrapped in grays and blues. Waves roll in, not with force, but with suggestion. Even the air is tentative, like the whole coast is waiting for permission to begin. This is Gaza's western border. No fences here, no guard towers, no razor wire, just the sea. But make no mistake, this too is a wall. The Israeli naval blockade restricts fishing to a narrow band, sometimes 6 nautical miles, sometimes 3. Further than that, and boats are chased, stopped, or shot at. So this ocean, once the lifeline of the Strip, now only whispers of what could have been. You walk past fishermen mending nets with sun-worn hands. One of them, Mahmoud, smiles without looking up. We catch hope, he says, even if the fish don't come. He shows you an old map drawn in pen on cardboard, detailing deeper waters. The good spots, the coral reefs, the paths he can't take anymore. I still dream of these, he says, tapping the unreachable parts. His boat painted turquoise and yellow is named Freedom. Not because of politics, he says, because it used to move. You sit on the pier and watch a boy throw a line into the water with no bait. He knows nothing will bite. He just likes the sound of the splash. His father sits nearby, drawing waves in the sand with a stick. This is what peace looks like, he murmurs. Temporary. Fragile. Tidal. There's something about the water that makes people speak softly. Even so, the sea carries stories. Smugglers once used these waves. So did British gunboats. So did Roman triremes, Ottoman traders, and French explorers. Historians still argue whether Gaza's port could ever be restored to what it was, a Mediterranean hub, full of spice, silk, and salt. Now, it holds plastic bottles, dead jellyfish, and a rusted pier. Still, children play soccer beside it like it's the edge of the world. Maybe it is. You follow a narrow path up the dunes to a ruined building. 'Twas once the Maritime Police HQ. Now it's graffiti-covered and crumbling. On one wall, someone scrawled in Arabic, "We were born between tides." You pause. Because that feels true. Inside, someone's turned the empty space into an art exhibit, portraits made from sea glass, shipwreck, wood, and flattened soda cans. One piece shows a man walking across water, his head held high, his feet not quite touching the surface. You ask the artist what it means. He's not drowning, she says. But he isn't arriving either. That night, you walk through a neighborhood freshly rebuilt for the 4th time. The bricks are still sharp, the cement pale. Children's bikes lean against doors without locks. Life, once again, trying to take root. Quirky fact: one family has planted sunflowers on their roof not for aesthetics, but because sunflowers follow the light. We watch them instead of the power schedule, the daughter jokes. You wander past murals of doves and keys, past shops with flickering signs, past street vendors selling falafel in cones made from torn UN pamphlets, past a boy selling used SIM cards from a box labeled Future. You pass a wedding. The bride wears pink. The groom wears hope. A speaker blasts music into the cracked evening. You pass a funeral. Quiet, gentle. Grief contained like steam under cloth. A small crowd. A shared silence. Someone reads verses, slowly, as if trying not to wake the sky. You pass 3 girls jumping rope with a wire once used for a satellite dish. You pass a cat curled on top of a laptop, asleep and warm. You pass Gaza, or it passes through you. And as the night deepens, so does the stillness, not absent stillness. Like the city is listening to itself breathe. You think about all you've seen, the borders, the checkpoints, the myths, the mosaics, the youth who've never left, the elders who never returned, the songs, the silences, the weight of names and the lightness of laughter. You think? Maybe Gaza isn't defined by its boundaries. Maybe it's defined by the people who live in defiance of them. Maybe it's not a prison or a war zone or even a place. Maybe it's a kind of pulse, and still it beats. The sea is still there. Even as you close your eyes and let your thoughts begin to float, it lingers, soft, rhythmic, steady. You picture it now, that familiar edge where the land gives way to something wider. The same waves, the same voices, the same unfinished song. Everything slows. The light, now a low hush across the floor of your mind, softens even the sharpest memories. Gaza drifts behind you like a lantern pulled gently across dark water. You don't have to hold on. It won't vanish. It's part of you now. Let the borders blur. Let the ruins settle into silence. Let the echoes of laughter, of lullabies, of footsteps between stones, all of it gather like quiet stars above a coastline that never truly sleeps. You breathe in, gently. The air carries salt and jasmine. You breathe out. The night deepens. No more questions now. No more stories to chase. Just stillness. Just you, floating on the rhythm of a place older than maps, softer than headlines, stronger than walls. Sleep comes like a tide, slow, certain. And Gaza, like all beautiful places, fades not with absence, but with peace.